everything I do is old school. There's not going to be any pictures flashing on the board. There's not going to be any bright lights. It's just going to be me talking. And so you all need to really use your imagination and try to imagine where you were. You remember reading books when you were a kid and you felt like you were in the Old West or on the ship and stuff? You need to do that today. Good luck. When I was reviewing the lives of my grandfather Moore and my dad in preparation for this talk, I was amazed again at the courage, dedication, and adventurous spirit they had. Now, I've been incredibly fortunate to travel and go to a lot of places, but I realize my life compared to them is pretty much small potatoes. And so it was kind of fun reading this. Never met my grandfather. He died 5 years before I was born. And everything I know about him is from his memoirs, which were written with my grandmother as he was dying of cancer. And they spent a couple months putting this together. Fascinating, to read these things. And I've read them probably 2 or 3 times. So any of you that aren't feeling well and want to write some memoirs, now's a good time to get started. Okay, grandfather was born in the Blue Ridge Mountains of North Carolina in 1889, 135 years ago. When he was 4, the family, which consisted of him, his brother, his younger brother, and of course his dad, traveled to East Texas to buy a farm and start cotton farming. Now, there's a chance to use your imagination. How the heck did they get there? 900 miles, no interstate highways, no cars, no planes. Trains didn't go out there on the Blue Ridge Mountains. East Texas was kind of barren. So I think the only way they got there was probably a covered wagon or uncovered wagon stuffed with everything they had, and it probably took 3 months. No mention of how they got there in the memoirs, but I thought that's kind of interesting. It shows a different time and a different place. Let me think here. His mom died about 1.5 years after they got there, and there was no record that his father remarried. So he was working on the farm, picking cotton, and the educational opportunities were pretty weak there, and they needed all hands on deck. So when he was 13, he dropped out of school in the 8th grade, and he got really pretty good at picking cotton. When he was 15, they had a county fair, and he won the cotton picking contest. And I think he did the most in 30 minutes of picking cotton. And most of the hands that worked on the farm were black. And they would sing spirituals. And he enjoyed that immensely, made several good friends with them, and would be out there in the field picking cotton and singing. So that was his life. When he turned 16, they decided they'd had enough of this cotton picking farm. And so they went to West Texas and apparently acquired a ranch. And Keenan likes this part of the story because he became a cowboy. And for the next 3.5 years, he was a cowboy. And he showed some progress. He ended up having 4 or 5 cows of his own and a horse and a spare horse. But he was not happy. He was unsatisfied with his life. And one day, he turned over the cows and the horses to his dad for care and announced that he was going back to school. Now, here he is. He's about 19 and a half, big, strong guy, and he's going to go back into 8th grade with a bunch of 13-year-olds. Probably couldn't even sit at the desk, but he traveled to a town where they had a school. They were out in the boonies, and started back to school. And he proved to be a natural student. And this was the start of 10 years round the clock schooling that he did. And he got out of high school in a couple of years because he was smart, sharp, and worked hard. And after working a couple of years, he started junior college. And it was a town outside of Abilene, Texas. I forget what the name of the town was. And the funny thing is, he's working, he's going to school. Well, he's also playing football for this place. It turns out he's a center for the football team. And if you've ever played football, that's the lousiest position you could ever play. So people are always whacking you in the head and so forth. But he was walking around one evening with one of his buddies, and they came across a tent revival. Now, you got to be pretty old to remember those things, but small towns particularly had them. And they would put up a tent, and someone would talk about hell and damnation and scare you to death, frankly. And then at the end, they always had an altar call. And at the end of the service, he found himself walking down the aisle and announcing that he wanted to be a Christian. And he said at the time that he felt a calling that maybe he could be a minister. So the next couple of years, he went to various churches and spoke at a lot of churches. Apparently, he was very charismatic. And I've never heard of this before. Some of you ministers will understand it. But he was ordained by the Baptist Church for gospel ministry. Whatever the heck that is. What do you think? I don't know. But it's a layman, probably a layman doing it. But so that's what he did. And then he got out of the junior college and went to Simmons University. Well, y'all will figure that out. It's Hardin-Simmons now. And that's where he met my grandmother, fell in love, and graduated from there and was about to have a job as a high school principal. But that's not really what he wanted to do. He wanted to be a minister. And just fortuitous, one of the people who had known him for a couple of years, seen him, followed his progress as a lay person giving sermons, came to him and said, "Hey, I've done pretty well. I'd like to finance your education at the Baptist Seminary in Louisville." So he married my grandmother. They got it up, and they somehow got to Louisville. I have no idea how they got there. Probably rode horses or something. And they got to Louisville, and in 2 years, he graduated from Louisville as a full-fledged, legitimate Baptist minister. Well, he had worked incredibly hard for 10 years, and now things were going to get turned for the good. He was able to find a job as an associate minister at a large Baptist church in Atlanta, Georgia, and he and my grandmother went there, and it was just, things were perfect. He liked what he did. He worked hard. My dad's older sister was born. My dad was born in Atlanta, and all things were good. And then something happened that changed their lives forever. Grandfather was at a gathering in Macon, Georgia, when a man who had been a missionary in China spoke. And one of the first things he said was, "How many of you here are younger than 32? Well, about 9 or 10 people stood up, including my grandfather, who was going to be 32 in about another couple months. And he said, "All right, here's the deal. The Mission Society has said needs missionaries in China desperately, North China. But at age 32, we can't use anybody over that age. So we want experienced people that are young and willing to do something like that." Well, his whole life, he had always felt kind of like, I ought to be doing this thing. I ought to not just talking the talk, but walking the walk. So he got the application and showed up and surprised my grandmother with this thought. Now, you have to take it from her side a little bit. They had worked hard, spent this time. They're in high cotton, I had to use that phrase right now, in Atlanta, and things are going well. And here he shows up. She's got 2 babies under the age of 2 and says, "Honey, I think the Lord has called us to go to China." Well, China is not a place people wanted to go. First off, it was clear on the other side of the world, you know, the place when you dig a hole and you end up in China? That's kind of what, I think that's true, isn't it? Anyhow, so that was what was waiting for him there. And she just, you know, I don't think she said anything. She wrote a lot of the memoirs, so probably this was from her side. He said, "Now, I tell you what," and then you talk about doing a dirty trick. He says, "I can't go unless you want to go too. I'm sure if God called me, he's going to call you. But if you tell me that you just don't want to do it, that's the last we'll talk about it. And we'll just go on with our life in this boring country," or something like that. He didn't say that, but he said, "We'll just go on." Well, she cried, she prayed, she looked at the kids. I mean, China was barbaric. 15 years earlier, they'd had the Boxer Rebellion. Y'all remember that? The Boxer Rebellion in 1905, they had murdered hundreds of missionaries. It was a rebellion where they wanted to get rid of all the foreigners, and most of them were missionaries. And so, backwards, a lot of outlaws, politically unstable, whatever. But After 5 days, she woke up one morning and said, okay, if you want to go, I want to go too. And so they signed up to go to China. Well, y'all are familiar with the song, I'd Like to Get You on a Slow Boat to China. That was the one they were on. It took 7 weeks. And there were, the plus was there were over 200 new missionaries on the boat. And so they made a lot of friends. But everybody got sick at least once, and several people several times. And they finally end up in south of what used to be called Peking, and now it's Beijing, the capital. And they were there. Well, the first thing they do is they settle everybody down, and whoever was going to be the missionaries go to school 10 hours a day for 6 days a week to learn Chinese, learn how to write it, and learn how to speak it. And it took about a year for most people to get proficient enough that they felt they were ready to go. So that's what they did. And then they went to a place called Shifu, China, which was a bustling port city. And that's where the big China mission was, where missionary mission, and it was like a dormitory. They had a girls' boarding school and a boys' boarding school, a big athletic field between them. They had places for the people who ran the school to live. They had people for a place where the missionaries could come in and visit their kids. Lots of times it'd be a year and a half before they'd see the kids. They'd come in for a couple of days and visit and then leave. Anyhow, they got there. My grandfather was trying to figure out where he was going to go, and the person who ran the place got sick. And they immediately came to my grandfather and said, we want you to run the place. You're mature, you're done this, you've had tough jobs and so forth and so on. And so long story short, he got to be a high school principal after all. But this was not really what he did. He did lots of different things. I've got him here, I'll tell you what he did. Secretary of the Shifu Missionary Station, superintendent of the boys' school, in charge of the county evangelistic work, sometimes pastor of the Chinese church, representative on the Shifu Baptist Mission, and many civic and religious committees. Anyhow, long story short, he had a whole lot of jobs, and he really enjoyed it. He and my grandmother both fell in love with the Chinese people and being in China. They really, really enjoyed it. So they were there 7 years. My dad's 2 younger sisters were born there, so the family now was 6. And in 1926, after 7 years, they took a year off, as what was the standard deal, to go back to the States and to talk about what they had done to raise money. And so they were going to do this. Well, when they left, my grandfather was apparently very popular. And I think one of the reasons that people liked him is he wasn't the guy to stand back and ask people to do stuff. He was the guy that jumped in and led them and worked with them. And most of the people there who have had any position of authority just stood and said, you do that, you do this. He was just right in the middle of the group, all the years picking cotton and riding the horses, and he was a team player in effect. And they hadn't seen that, they liked it. So when it was time to leave, they had a series of feasts where they presented presents to him. And he got some just really nice Chinese stuff. But the one thing that he got that he liked best was made by a Chinese deacon, and it was a silk outfit. It wasn't a robe, but it was an outfit that you wear on a special occasion. It was red, and just a beautiful thing. And he really liked it, and he wore it often when he got back to the States, when he talked about being a missionary and living in China. And then he announced that he wanted to be buried in it. And he was. So that was kind of a cool deal. Okay. When they got back to the States, and they were ready to spend a year and then get back to China, the mission board was having some financial problems. And so they said, if you want to go back, you need to raise your own money to go back, and you also need to raise enough salary for a year or two, then we'll step in and take over. So that's what he did. And about the time after the end of the year when they were going to go back, my grandmother got sick. And so this is probably typical of my grandfather. he gave the money they'd raised to somebody else who didn't have the money, and they went back. Then they started all over again. So it took 3 years for them to get the money and to raise it and go back to China, and they got back there in 1929. They settled back in Shifu, got the kids all in school. The missions had kind of fallen in disarray since he had left. The leadership hadn't been that good, so they had to work hard to get everything going again. But they did, and things were going good. My grandfather was described as kind of the dreamer in the family. My grandmother was the practical one. And knowing my grandmother, that was a pretty good statement about her. Sidebar, some friends of mine went through Waco years ago when she was there, and she had been waiting for us because she wanted us to move furniture for 2 hours. And so she was the type of lady that had figured out something for you to do. But my grandfather came up with 2 things that really worked out well for him. One was a fellow in China had some cows, and he wanted to donate them to the mission, but you had to come get them and bring them back. So my grandfather takes a series of trains, a 1,000-mile round trip, and brings back these 2 big milk cows. And there were no cows within 30 miles of where they were, and milk was just considered, wonderful stuff. And so they started milking the cows and selling a lot of the milk, and they used the funds from that to help pay for a lot of the stuff around the mission. And my dad's job, as he pointed out to me, was milking the cows. And he said he kind of liked it. I thought that was weird, but he did. The other thing was he was able to contact some of his friends and get a car. He got a Chevrolet, 1930 Chevrolet. And as Keaton will tell you, anybody that works on either a ranch or a farm has got to be able to put stuff together and do all kind of work like that. And so he took this perfectly good car and turned it into a truck. Put all sorts of things on it where it'd hold a lot of mission stuff. But one of the things it held was a pole that was a tent pole that they used to go out and to the countryside and have revivals. And they called it the gospel car. And it was kind of famous because there might be 6 cars within, 10 miles, and this was one of them, the gospel car. So they did that. Well, as the years went by, the political situation was getting worse and worse. Now, the problem wasn't just internal, which it had been internal, but now it was external, and it was the Japanese. The Japanese were starting to get very aggressive towards the Chinese. And first off, they had Manchuria. If you've ever seen a picture of China, it's at the top of China. They took over Manchuria and renamed it, the Japanese did. Then the next year, they had something that they call, let me see I'll find it here. What was the name? It was an incident. They provoked the Shanghai incident. And it's like these people do all the time, the bad guys out there, is they provoke some incident and then say, this is our reason for going in an attack. You were going to attack us or something. So they ended up bombed about half of Shanghai and just took rabble and killed 50,000 people or more. But the things really turned in 1937 when, number one, they attacked Peking, and number two, they had a city called Nanking. Now, you all have heard of Nanking, Nanking, and they call it the Rape of Nanking. And people that were in Nanking and Beijing now, there were a bunch of foreigners there, and they were not harassed because they didn't want to upset the foreigners. But so, they would leave them alone and attack the Chinese. Well, in Nanking, they reported that after they had taken the city and controlled it, they let the army loose. And they were raping all the women. They were using young boys as bayonet practice, tying them to a rope, and everybody was running and stabbing them with bayonets. They machine guns, thousands of soldiers, and on and on. And the best guess estimate is somewhere around 300,000 Chinese were murdered, and they were murdered by the Japanese. Well, it was time for the Moore family to go home, and both my dad and his older sister had graduated from the high school, and despite living only 3 blocks away from the school, my dad had talked him into letting him board for the last 2 years. He wanted to be boarding at school, and he really enjoyed it. He developed wonderful friendships, and he had a great respect for his teachers. All but 3 years that he had been back in the States, he had gone to this school. This had been his school for, first grade through the 12th grade. By the time he graduated, he was fluent in Chinese. He got an excellent education because it was kind of a British type education. A lot of the kids were from Britain and the teachers were from England. And the last 2 years he played on an all-star soccer team, which was kind of cool. So he was all around doing a pretty good guy. During their last year in China, my grandfather wasn't well. He had always been an incredibly vital guy, lots of energy, lots of enthusiasm, but he wasn't feeling well. And so we wanted to get back to the States and check and see what might be the problem. Well, he got back, went to some doctors, and it turned out he had colon cancer. And the doctors told him he had probably had it for a couple of years. No treatment or anything, because he didn't have that type of medical expertise. And so for a while he looked like he was doing better, and then like so often with cancer, it came back with a vengeance. And in 1938 he died, and it probably took a year and a lot of pain, but he was confident of where he was going after he died. He was looking forward to seeing the man or the Savior that he had served so well during his life. Okay, that's it with grandfather. My daughter suggested I might think a little bit about a word or two that you would say to describe his life. And I think perseverance might be just jump to the top. I mean, 10 years of school around and following your dream, and adventures. I mean, they had never even been in a boat. They had never been on the ocean. And here we're going to China and back. They went, 4 times. And so I think that's just a kind of a cool story. Okay, that's grandfather. Now we're moving on to my dad. Once back in the States, they moved to Abilene, Texas. And my dad and his sister went to Hardin Simmons because Baptist missionaries' kids didn't have to pay any tuition. And so they went there. For you guys, Oklahoma State, you're not the only Cowboys. The Hardin Simmons Cowboys were the name of the team. And the school had a very good football team, hard to envision, but back in this time, they had about 5 or 6 guys on the team that ended up playing in the NFL. And my dad, being smarter than playing football, he became a cheerleader. And the colors, if you can envision this, were purple and gold. And they just looked god awful. I've got a picture of them at home in purple. And he bought a car. He bought a Model T, kind of a junker, for $20 from some kid on the campus, and promptly painted it purple and gold. And I asked my mom about it one time. She said, when he would come by to pick me up for a date, the neighbors would all cringe, he's got to drive him through the neighborhood in this terrible car. Anyhow, since he had gone to a boys' school and had little experience with the opposite sex, he was really truly green around the ears. However, I've been assured that he apparently caught up to speed very quickly. In those days, cheerleading was an all-male deal. If you've ever seen the Aggies with the male cheerleaders, and you had to do some tumbling. You had to have some skills. And my dad was the bottom man in a tumbling routine, and his partner was a fellow named Charlie Pound. And Charlie ended up going to Illinois, teaching gymnastics, and being a 4-time head Olympic coach in the Olympics for the United States. And they kept in touch and everything. And I met Charlie, came by the house one time, and when I was finishing my high school years, and said, hey, if I was interested in going to Illinois, he could give me a football scholarship there. Well, I remember Illinois had a guy named Dick Butkus that just scared the heck out of me, so I didn't want to go there very much. So, okay. In addition to cheerleading, Dad worked several jobs and was a boxer. He became a boxer. He had one of his favorite professors in China liked to box and taught him how to box. They sparred together quite a bit. And so he fought in something they call smokers. Now, it's part of the imagination of the work. And the reason they call them smokers, there were a bunch of guys, no women, who would sit around and smoke cigars and watch the boxing match. And kind of disgusting in there. Anyhow, the winner of these smokers, and these were amateurs, quote amateurs, would get a gold medal, and the loser would get a silver medal. And then after everyone left, you had to go see the promoter, and the gold medal would be sold back for $15, and the silver medal, $10. Well, people have said, gee, $15 for being, fighting 3 rounds and all this kind of, that's not much money at all. Well, this was towards the end of the Depression. The minimum wage was a quarter, and most people didn't pay the minimum wage, they paid less. And so $15 was a lot of money when you could go to a movie for 10 cents. So he fought quite a bit all around the Abilene area and had enough success that they proclaimed him to be the light heavyweight champion of Texas. Anyhow, he fought under the name of James Walton because he didn't want his mom to find out. I don't think she ever did, but he did that for a while. Okay. Let me get this next page here. Following college, which he finished in 3.5 years, Dad needed to find a job. A friend of his had gone to work for the FBI in Washington, D.C., and got in touch with him and said they were hiring. Now, this job was not as an agent. To be an agent, you had to be 25 and either a CPA or have a law degree. But they were hiring. So Dad stuffed his life savings into his shoe. This apparently was a good place to hide your money. And packed a bag and hitchhiked to Washington from Abilene, Texas, 1,650 miles. Now, that sounds incredible, but that's how a whole lot of people got around in those days. I mean, you just didn't have it. And apparently he didn't get robbed, so he made it okay. Moved into a boarding house, and shortly after he was there, got a job as a clerk with the FBI. He sent a telegram to my mom and said, I'm looking around and there's 10 women for every man in this town. If you want to get married, you better get here soon. Well, she did, and they did. So they got married. And the fun part here is Mom also got a job at the FBI as a secretary and made more than he did. Woman power or something like that. While my parents were living in Washington, World War II started. Dad was working days at the FBI and going to law school at night. Now, although the FBI was considered vital to the war effort and their employees were exempt from service, it was becoming shorthanded. As a result, the FBI lowered its requirements to be an agent, and Dad became one. At 22 years old, he was the youngest FBI agent in the country at the time. So he was originally signed to Springfield, Illinois. After a few months was transferred to San Francisco, California, where I was born. They had a small apartment right in the middle of the city and an older couple next door who enjoyed babysitting them. And they absolutely loved their time in San Francisco. And I'm going to do a quick sidebar here with a story about that. When the folks were probably our age now, 80-ish, Leslie and I went with them and we went to Alaska. And what they say about cruises is that, they're for the nearly dead and the newlyweds. And that was, that was pretty true. So it was kind of, my folks were not really late night people. So we'd get a cocktail and then we'd go eat at 6, I think, and at 7 we'd go to the show. They had a show every night. And then they'd go to bed about 8:15, and Leslie and I'd go to the bar. What was the thing? Piano bar. And they'd be singing songs. And the piano bar was probably everyone our age on the ship. There were about 50 people. We got to know everybody. It was a lot of fun. The piano player was a fellow named Randy, who was from Corsicana, Texas, and I always thought, where worse a place could you live, Randy, than Corsicana, Texas? Anyhow, but Randy would start playing Oklahoma every time we came in. He was just a nice guy. And so I asked him one time, I said, Randy, I said, you've been doing this, what, for 4 months? He said, oh, yeah. He said, I've got 2 weeks to go. I said, is there one song that people request that you're just sick of? He said, oh, God. He said, if I have to play I Left My Heart in San Francisco one more time, I think I'm going to puke. He said, well, here's the rest of the story. The next night, Mom says, let's go up to the place up on the top. We haven't been to that bar and have a drink up there. So we walk in, and there's Randy playing the piano. You guys know the rest of the story. I introduced her and my dad to Randy, and he's very nice. I said, Pat, could I play something for you? He said, yes, would you play our song, I Left My Heart in San Francisco? And then Randy, God bless him, said, I'd love to play that for you. Anyhow, that was kind of switching sideways. While Dad loved San Francisco, he was becoming very frustrated with the FBI. The FBI was controlled by J. Edgar Hoover, as you all recall, and he was ruled it with an iron fist. They had a saying, the need to know thing, and the agents didn't need to know. They were just told what to do. They didn't know why. And my dad always was the type of guy, why are we doing this? Didn't go over very well. The other thing that was really bothering him, he really felt like he should have been in the war. And even though they told him constantly, you're more important here and so forth and so on, he wasn't buying that too well. So there was an outfit that had been started during World War II called the OSS, the Office of Strategic Services. It's hard to say that. Office, and the head of that thing was an old friend of Roosevelt's called Wild Bill Donovan. And Wild Bill had been a Medal of Honor winner. He was a general, and so FDR asked him to put together a group to do clandestine Secret Service type things, to work with spies over in various countries and ready to get this going. Now the OSS became the CIA after World War II. Well, Dad was kind of a guy that they wanted because he spoke Chinese. They needed people in China, and so he had the background that was pretty good. So we talked to Donovan, and they hired him, and or said, we'll hire you. So he resigned from the FBI, and the next day signed up to be in the OSS and was sent over to China. Well, this was late in '44, and the war was moving on and almost on the way out. And it was pretty obvious by then that the United States should win the war. And there was a concern about what would happen to all the people, the prisoners of war, but just as important, all the civilians that were in these concentration camps. The Japanese had proved to be just incredibly cruel. And they were concerned that even after they lost the war, they'd just murder everybody in the camps. They knew about Dad's history at the school, at the Shifu school. And they knew about what had happened to the school teachers and the students. They were all in the Wishing concentration camp. And so they put together a group, and one of numerous groups, that would fly into the camp as soon as the war was over and announce to the Japanese, hey, you lost, and we're taking over. Now, in case they didn't know, and they might not know. And so there were like 40 soldiers in the deal, and so they sent a group of 6 people. I'll read about this to you a little bit. Okay, when he resigned from the FBI and he signed up, he was off to Kunming, China. There he got parachute training. He was the only Caucasian in the group, so he had to jump first. And he told me one time, he said, the more I jumped, the worse my odds seemed to be getting to me. So, but he jumped. As the war was drawing to a close, they were worried about the Japanese people and what they would do to the prisoners. Plan was made to fly missions to all the camps as soon as possible after the war ended. Part of the job was to revive the guard as the war was over, and then secure the camp. Dad was second in command of the mission to liberate the camp at Wishen. Early one morning, 3 days after the surrender of Japan, a plane carrying 7 young Americans circled a field outside the Wishen camp. The bottom of the plane had been replaced with plywood so it could be removed, and they would sit on the edge and push out. Now this is very interesting. Since the jump was from 400 feet, to give the guards less time to shoot them in the air, they used the British quick opening chutes. Dad remembered them getting banged around pretty good, and one man dislocated a soldier, but the guards didn't shoot, and the camp was liberated. Okay. After the war was over, the OSS was changed to CIA, and Donovan recruited some of his old, guys who had been in the OSS, and my dad was one of them. CIA employees didn't tell people who they really worked for. They were undercover, and to a degree that's still true. But so he was working for the State Department, and he started out in China, and speaking Chinese helped, and he was there. But this was a time when the communists were really taking over China. There was the nationalists and the communists were more successful. And after they basically took over, they decided they didn't want any foreigners in the country more. So they kicked all the foreigners out of China. And Dad was switched over to the consul in Calcutta, India. So that's where they spent the next 2 years. Well, Calcutta is also known as the Black Hole, but that's just another name to call it, I think. But it was, dead people on the street in the morning, that kind of stuff. So, but not for the consulate. It was party valid. And India had just basically got their freedom from England, but the English were still there. And so Nehru was the president of India, and Lord Montbom was the head English guy there. 2 months before they got there, Gandhi had been assassinated. So they were in Calcutta. Anyhow, listening to my mom talk about this, it was degenerate. They had about 8 servants, and each servant did one job, the sweeper. And if you asked the sweeper to pick up the laundry, he said, "No, I'm the sweeper." And so that was kind of the way it was. Everybody had a job. So, and the primary part of the job was parties. Every night you'd have somebody would have a deal at their embassy or their home, and the Indians didn't like the British, and the feeling was likewise. So they weren't invited to each other's parties. But the Americans, everybody liked them. They went to all the parties. And my dad managed to pick up 45 pounds in 2 years. And he was about 6 feet tall, and he had 4 tuxedos. And so anyhow, when he got back, Stacy started playing handball, lost weight, probably saved his life. But at the time they were gonna come back, he had a job offer to stay there. And my mom said, "We're getting out of here. No mas, let's go." So they came home. He ended up being settled down in Houston, and for about 5 years, working for the CIA office there. And then he transferred up to Dallas and ran the Dallas office, which was not the head office, but one of the offices. Had a couple of people working for him there. And as you all may recall, on November 22nd, 1963, President Kennedy was assassinated in Dallas. And of course the FBI and my dad both got a lot more notoriety than they ever wanted to have. And they, if you ever read any books about conspiracy stories and everything, you'll find my dad's name about every other page. So it's kind of but his personal view was that, hey, Lee Harvey Oswald was on his own. He was such a goofus guy, nobody would have trusted him with anything, so I think that makes some sense. In 1973, the CIA shifted their head office for the Southwest region to Dallas, and my dad became head of that region, which included Louisiana, Arkansas, New Mexico, Oklahoma, that whole area, probably 40 agents reporting to his office. Several years later, after serving basically in either the FBI, the service, or the CIA, Dad had 40 years of service, and that was the most you could get retirement on, so he decided to retire. And so he went to Washington, D.C. for the ceremony, and George Bush Sr. was the head of the CIA at the time. And Dad had reported to him for a couple years, and they got to be pretty good friends. And Bush gave him a plaque or something for his service. And the fun thing about that was that the Bush family always sent, probably sent thousands of them, but Christmas cards to people. And which was really cool in about 10 or 15 years when Bush was the president. So you'd have, your card from Aunt Martha, and you get from some such, and there's one from the president over here. So that was kind of really neat. It was a fancy card, but that was kind of a cool deal. After Dad's retirement, he and my mom did quite a bit of traveling, and in the early 1980s, China decided they were going to open up the country again after 35 years of no foreigners. And the first people they invited were going to be missionaries' kids and people who had been there. So Dad went to the Dallas Public Library downtown, and this shows you how long ago, and got records on speaking Mandarin Chinese and would play and to freshen up his Chinese skills. And really after about 4 months, everything came back. And so he went and had a bus they went around on, and shortly after they got it, it turned out he spoke Chinese better than anybody but the Chinese. And they were very cautious about people talking to men on the street. And you were only supposed to talk to the guide. Well, Dad would wander off and start talking to some man on the street and get in trouble. But it was kind of a fun time. My mom at first didn't want to go that much, but she's always been kind of a, I don't know what word you use, Leslie, loud, boisterous, enthusiastic. So, yes. So anyhow, they'd be looking at the Great Wall of China, and 700 Chinese would be looking at them. And so she got my dad to teach her to say, "Greetings from the United States," and she would wave. "Greetings from the United States," and everybody would kind of. So that was kind of a hoot. So she did that, and they had a good time. Okay, let me see where I am here. I got one. Okay. When Dad was 78 years old, younger than I am now, something pretty cool happened. I mentioned earlier about liberating the camp in Wishing at the end of World War II. One of the prisoners in the camp was a girl named Mary Brevity, who later had married an American and moved to New Jersey. She was 12 years old when she was liberated in the camp. And she decided in 1997 to try to find the heroes who had dropped out of the sky and rescued her. She'd become a representative in the legislature in New Jersey, and had given a talk to a group of veterans and told them about the rescue and her dream of finding her rescuers. So with the help of their help, the search was on. The internet was new, but they had some evidence. And she had a fellow named Peter, who was a fellow representative, and she told him his story, and found out Jim Moore had been in the FBI. So this guy was a former FBI. He said, if anybody can find him, we can find him. So they were looking around for him. They asked Mary, she was kind of a newcomer on the deal, to repeat her story, which she had given several times and just was a marvelous speaker, apparently. People would get cheery and whatever, on Memorial Day to all the fellow representatives. Well, Peter got on the horn and talked to my dad and mom and said, hey, how about we fly you guys up here, it's on us, and you surprise Mary at the end of her speech. And you might talk for 5 minutes. So my dad said, yeah, that sounds fun. So they went up, and I'm going to give you her speech here for 1 second. And you could see the English teacher in this because she repeats certain phrases. My love affair with America started more than 50 years ago. August 17, 1945. I was 12 years old. For 3 years, I'd been a child prisoner in a Japanese concentration camp in China. And now they were spilling from the guts of the slow-flying plane, dangling from parachutes that looked like giant poppies, dropping into the fields beyond the barrier walls. 7 young American airmen, rescuing angels, floating from the skies onto the fields beyond the Weishan concentration camp. The camp went mad. 2,000 prisoners weeping, shouting, dancing, punching the sky with their fists, pounding the ground. I had not seen my missionary parents for 5.5 years. Dressed in proud patches and bony with hunger, we surged onto the fields beyond the barrier walls. How do you survive 3 years in a concentration camp? The grown-ups knew about those things, and what happens on the inside of you preserves the outside. It was spirit. They kept saying it. We would win this war. We believed them. Every Tuesday night outside the Japanese commandant's office, the Salvation Army band practiced a victory medley. They mixed together the music of Happy Days or Here Again with 4 national anthems: American, British, Chinese, and Russian. Whoever rescued us, we were ready. And now, out in the fields beyond the barrier wars, the prisoner men hosted these sun-bronzed American gods onto their shoulders, carrying them toward the concentration camp gate. Up on a mound by the gate, the Salvation Band was playing the victory medley. When the band got to the words, "Oh, say, does that star-spangled banner show over the land of the free and the home of the brave," a young American major slithered to the ground to a standing salute, and a young trombonist in the Salvation Army band crumpled to the ground and wept. We were free. Anyhow, everyone in the audience is kind of getting upset and then say, "Oh, by the way, Mary, we've got a surprise for you. Jim Moore's up here from Dallas." I'll wave this picture. There's my dad greeting her at the, anyhow. So he comes out and she gets really emotional. I'm getting emotional. But it was a really cool deal. Really a cool deal. And then he gave a speech, and he said the real heroes were the people in the camp. There was one of those guys that jumped, and then they argued about that for a while, and then they decided they were all heroes. So, but that was kind of a fun deal. It was really, and he one of his comments that I always liked was, he said, they asked him, he says, "Hey, I'm 78 years old, nothing much exciting happens to me. This was cool. I like this a lot. This was great." So, okay, almost finished. 5 years later, actually more than that, in 2005, the Weishing, the town, decided to have a celebration, a 60-year celebration of the rescue at the camp, and invited all the people who had been at the camp and the people involved in the rescue. And to give you an idea of the changes in China, the city had been maybe 30,000 people when the camp was there. Now it was 6 million people. So my dad was invited. Here's a thing I brought, but this is an invitation from the mayor of the thing. Anyhow, well, my mom said, "I don't want, Jim, I'm tired, I'm too old. Why don't you get Mike to go with you?" So he called me. I said, "Yeah, I'll go." He said, we're gonna have some fun." So it had been a pretty good year in the oil business, and so I said, we're gonna do this upright. So I got us some first-class tickets on the American Airlines. I had a direct flight from China to Beijing. I mean, from Chicago to Beijing, and we were going to stay at the Four Seasons and do this and do that and everything. And he was kind of excited, and but he said, "I need to go in and probably have a checkup," because he had some problems with cancer. So he went in, and sure enough, it had all come back, and it was worse than ever. So he couldn't. The doctor said, "There's no way you ought to be going anywhere right now. And that was pretty much towards the end. And I guess next year, he passed away. Now, some of you have heard this before, but I thought it was kind of timely. He ended up dying on Father's Day in 2006. And so, okay, here's the last of the story. My granddaughter, Caitlin, we took her to Washington, D.C. when she was 12. And we decided that we would, each of the grandchildren, take them for a special trip. So we went to Washington, D.C. And by the way, when we took the boys, she was a lot more mature at 12 than they were at 13. So off we went to Washington, D.C. But before I got a call from my mom, and she said, Mary Previty sent me a note the other day. She put together a exhibit of the rescue in Washington, and it's showing at the Natural History Museum, the Smithsonian Museum in the World War II department. I said, I don't know if it's still up, but if you might check it out. So we're walking around there, and we turn the corner, and we look in there, and there's my dad. So that was kind of a fun deal. All right, guys, I've timed this pretty good. Does anybody have any questions at all? Yeah.
I just had a comment. I don't know if you recall, Mike, but that whole story about your dad and going back to see Mary was on the Sunday Today Show. And we got to see your dad's picture and the whole story. I remember seeing
Keenan found it. What was the guy's name? Willie?
Willie Geist.
Yeah, the deal was a life well lived, and it was about her, this Mary Previty. And she was really, she had, I think she lost a hand in some sort of, but she had taught English, and then she ran basically a boys' school for juvenile delinquents, and came in with a whole new deal, treated them with respect, and the school did great and became the thing that everybody followed around the country. And she did that for 23 years. And then she obviously told this story, and so she was on that show. I'd love to find it again. King was, I were talking about seeing if we could still find it, because it. Yeah, maybe somewhere.
Thank you, Mike. We appreciate it. Good job.